Elysium actually, in terms of large summer films, has far less visual effects shots than some of the other films that this kind of movie would compete with. I think we have about 800 and something final VFX shots in a world where 1,500 VFX shots isn't out of the question for a summer blockbuster. It's the same as District 9. It punches above its weight. And that means that you don't go about doing VFX in exactly the same way that you would if you just had, unlimited sort of boatloads of money because you were making a PG-13 film that was based on a franchise. You always feel like you're right on the edge of the knife blade and you're trying to solve problems in a more economic way.
There's a shorthand between Neil and myself that allows him to not having to worry necessarily about being too explicit. He could say a few random things and I can usually figure out what he means and at least steer the design or the idea or the execution of the work in the right direction. And that is unique. I don't think you have that with everybody. Advantage of working with Neil is that he very much knows what he wants, and he had done his own research. He's obviously been thinking about this movie for years before it even entered into anyone else's minds.
For me, the most important thing is when visual effects is used in service of the story and to illustrate and build the world that the characters inhabit. It shouldn't be sort of in your face, distracting you.
Early on in trying to figure out what these vehicles would do on Earth versus how they would behave in space, I think you have to still try and achieve the majority of your effects, or at least assist the visual effects, by trying to create as much of that in camera. We have this Raven that has VTOL technology, and so Neil and I were collaborating on this idea that we should use real helicopters that would stand in for these space vehicles that were lifting off from Earth. First of all, it gives the camera operators something to aim the camera at. You can imagine that if they were just having to pretend on an empty plate or an empty area to pretend there's a spacecraft lifting off, that's very challenging. Maybe they're panning too fast, or they're tilting up too quickly, or they kind of lost where the spacecraft should be.
Just having that real thing, that helicopter just off the deck of this dump in Mexico and kicking up the dust, which just swirls in these incredibly detailed and random patterns that you would never imagine for it.
Playing the Raven, we have a picture helicopter that plays as our Raven, which we will replace that with a digital Raven. The picture helicopter is filmed by the camera helicopter. We're using a Eclipse stabilized to do all of that aerial footage. Fred North is our helicopter pilot for some of these action sequences, and he's one of the best in the world. His flying skills are scary to see by the untrained eye, for sure. He's done a lot of flyovers, a lot of low ground coverage of what the action was. Picture-to-picture or helicopter-to-helicopter footage, air-to-ground footage, rolling cameras on the ground, looking up at our picture ship. The rehearsals have to be tied in to avoid any kind of nasty accidents or colliding helicopters. The end result of that spectacular flying is some really good footage.
Certain shots, we had nothing but Kruger stepping up onto a small ladder and into kind of a green screen box. And we literally pulled him off of the plate and put the Raven entirely digitally behind him. In other cases, we had Kruger stepping onto a practical helicopter, and we kept him and removed the helicopter and put the Raven back in.
The design curve on the Raven started out with Neil and his team sending me the diagrams that were of the actual set that was to be constructed. From there, I built a little 3D model of the interior space, and then we began the process of designing the exterior of the craft over the interior that was already in the works. And that proved to be a bit of a challenge because the space on the interior is actually kind of rectilinear, and I think that the vehicle itself wanted to be much more like a bird of prey, right? It had kind of a more sleek quality. It's a VTOL vehicle, a vertical takeoff and landing craft. It was necessary for the engines to have the ability to rotate and turn their thrusting downward so that this vehicle could land and take off straight up and down. What I proposed to Neil was that we allow for some of that mechanism to show itself in the final design so that you could actually see how the engines rotated inside of these kind of large rings.
This is the Raven set that we had to build. There's two functions to this rig. One is we have airbags and a whole air system underneath it to shake the Raven when it's crashing. The second is to actually roll the Raven over when they're flying to Elysium and we're rolling the Raven as the guy gets kicked through the controls. The set weighs 30,000 pounds, so it's quite a bit of mass and inertia to get moving. So we're running it on a hydraulic system. We're putting 50,000 foot-pounds of torque into it. The system will run this at 60 RPM. So it runs very quickly, and we're actually having to tone that down for the stunts because we can't actually go as fast as the thing will go. People will get hurt.
We looked at a lot of modern military craft, especially things like Blackhawks, to see the kind of surface detail that they have and all of the different little electronic bits or bolts or wires or anything that could break up the surface and create visual detail. Very, very specific small details of the thrusters and close-ups of them. The front grille is featured. The Raven just plays so huge in the story, and it's such a character. And I think it's wonderful when a vehicle like that can go beyond its sort of pure function in the film and become something like the Millennium Falcon. It has this kind of personality to it that I think is really tough to achieve. Have that vehicle play the role of this death from above, so to speak, that it has in the film. The droids were one of the central challenges of Elysium. There were approximately 140 shots of droids in the film.
It's not as if the droids were just in the background, you know, walking props. They were right in the foreground, in front of camera, and interacting with our key cast, our characters. For every shot featuring the droids, we would have stunt performers in their grey suits, which is these head-to-toe, skin-tight Lycra outfits.
We would then later replace with the digital version, but we would maintain all of their action, all of their emotion, provides for great eye line with the other actors or interactivity. How you behave as a stunt person or as an actor in your gray suit, that is what's going to come to life in this droid. So you're going to have to kind of live and breathe being a droid to some degree.
I cannot arrest a citizen of Elysium.
When Kruger's character gets his face blown off,
You want it stuffed in there? You'd rather see
Yeah, stuff the meat flap. Stuff the meat flap.
Neil really wanted to see him being put on one of those med bays and use that technology to regenerate the face. Challenges there are, how do you keep that as real as possible? How do you not go into a complete sci-fi world? Of course, this could never happen. You still have to get buy-in from people watching and blend it into the rest of the story of the film. So one of the challenges was we had this practical head that we could put down there. And so you use very traditional setups where you put the head and you do a motion control pass, and then you do another motion control pass without the head, and then you do a motion control pass with the actor in position and lined up as best as you can. You can then, in visual effects, composite them together, and you can add additional effects to it to help the transition between the prosthetic head that was used, blend that into the actual actor's head using, you know, additional CG heads and elements of blood and gore and steam and smoke, while having a certain organic element to it. That went through many, many iterations, and it's that one shot that you have in your movie that just, you know, seems to last forever.
The immigrant shuttles are supposed to evoke images of boat people, refugees, these rusted out and graffitied craft, which again is something that we haven't seen before. I think it's the first time we're seeing graffiti-covered spaceships on film. The paintwork of the exterior was really fun for us to get into and imagine, you know, what would it look like way in the future when these shiny new ships weren't rolling off the production line anymore. People were trying to fix up old things. Like you look at these 1950s rust bucket cars that are still on the road today. You apply that same design to futuristic spaceships, and that's what we're aiming for.
There's shots in the film where there are so many elements stacking up in the shot that just it makes it an incredibly sci-fi, inspirational kind of image. Ultimately, when you have a droid, a raven, Elysium in the background, the depth and science fiction beauty of those images is really arresting.